Hey everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something that I think a lot of us struggle with, conflict resolution in relationships. And get this, our main source is, well, it's a YouTube video,
Oh, interesting.
right? It's called Real Talk Relationship
Hmm.
from a channel called BEDROK Carter. The hosts are Ameenah and Robert Johnson, and they have a guest, Day. Now, I know what you're thinking, a YouTube video for relationship advice. But stick with us on this one. There's some surprisingly practical stuff in here, especially when it comes to dealing with, well, self-centeredness.
It is interesting that you bring up that it's from a YouTube video. It kind of makes you think about how we tend to look for guidance in all these official places, like experts or books.
Yeah.
But honestly, sometimes the most insightful advice comes from just like everyday people sharing their experiences.
Mm.
And this video really dives into how self-centeredness can just totally mess up a relationship.
Yeah, and they don't sugarcoat it either. Right from the start, they're like, look, self-centeredness is straight up unhealthy. And they're not just talking about being a little selfish sometimes.
Right.
They're talking about a pattern, like a deeply ingrained habit that can really sabotage intimacy and connection.
And what's really fascinating is how Dine, one of the hosts, describes self-centeredness as a disease that needs to be treated.
Whoa.
That really struck me because it's not just about making little changes here and there. It's
Right.
about tackling a much deeper issue
Oh, wow.
and really putting in the work to grow as a person. It's almost like we have to unlearn this whole me first mentality that so many of us have. You know what I mean?
That's a powerful way to put it. And they do talk about how much work it takes. Robert Johnson, one of the hosts, is very clear that relationships are a two-way street. Being self-centered just doesn't work in that kind of dynamic. But he also acknowledges that unlearning these deep-seated behaviors, well, that takes time, a lot of patience, and from both people in the relationship, not just one.
Totally. And let's be real. We live in a culture that often glorifies being, independent and looking out for number one.
Mm-hmm.
It's no wonder so many of us struggle with self-centered tendencies. But the important thing here is that these patterns, they're not set in stone. We can change. But it takes self-awareness, right? It takes that willingness to actually do the work. And it takes a supportive partner who gets that change. It doesn't happen overnight.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Instead of saying conflict is something you should avoid at all costs, Ameenah actually frames it as like a normal and healthy part of any relationship. She even says conflict is part of a healthy relationship because we're different. We don't see things the same way. So naturally, you're going to have a conflict there.
Yeah.
It's kind of refreshing. Makes you see conflict not as a sign that your relationship is doomed,
Right.
but as a chance to grow.
Right. Because think about it. If we're always trying to avoid conflict, we're also avoiding chances to really understand our partner, to communicate what we need, and to figure out how to handle those differences in a way that actually works.
Mm-hmm.
And, from a psychology standpoint, avoiding conflict a lot of times just leads to resentment and passive aggression, which can be way more damaging in the long run.
It's like they're saying, lean into the discomfort of conflict because that's where the real growth is. And Dine reinforces this when he talks about self-centeredness is like a disease that needs treatment.
Oh, yeah. It's almost like by actually facing and dealing with these issues head on, in the middle of a conflict, that's how we can change ourselves and our relationships for the better.
Yeah, that's a total reframing, isn't it? Conflict goes from this scary thing to like a catalyst pushing us to face our, well, maybe not so great tendencies and try to become better partners. This kind of reminds me of what psychologists call the growth mindset, that idea that we can change and grow through effort and learning, that we're not just stuck with who we are. In this case, conflict becomes the training ground for empathy, compromise, and good communication.
Exactly. Like, what if the next time you and your partner bump heads, instead of immediately getting defensive or shutting down, you see it as a chance to actually make your relationship stronger? It's challenging for sure, but it could really change things. And what's great is the video doesn't just leave us with this idea. It actually gives us tools to navigate conflict in a way that builds us up, not tears us down. It's not about never disagreeing. It's about learning how to approach those disagreements so they bring you closer, not push you apart.
Okay, so let's break down these tools, these strategies. First up, honesty and a willingness to change. And I love how Robert ties this back to his point about relationships being a two-way street. It's like he's saying, we all have our moments of being self-centered, but owning it and being willing to put in the effort to change, that's what matters.
What I find interesting is that they emphasize both personal responsibility and the need to work together. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about acknowledging your own role in the conflict and then coming together to find a solution. And that takes a certain level of vulnerability that can be tough, but it ultimately deepens trust and intimacy.
For sure. There's no room for defensiveness or blame games in this approach. It's about being open to feedback, even if it stings a little, and having the courage to look at your own flaws. And that leads us to another important tool: compromise and tolerance. Those aren't just buzzwords. They're like essential skills for navigating those inevitable differences that pop up in any relationship.
Yeah, I think a lot of people misunderstand compromise. It's not about giving up everything you want or believe in. It's about getting creative and finding a solution that works for both people as best as you can. And it takes a healthy dose of tolerance, too.
Right.
Being able to accept those little quirks and flaws that your partner has, even when they drive you up the wall, you know? It really is amazing how much they pack into this video, you know? And in a way that just makes sense. We've gone from self-centeredness, like we were talking about, to seeing conflict as a way to actually grow. And now we have all these like practical tips to actually handle those tough moments.
Yeah, and they make it feel so doable.
Mhm.
Like it's not some complicated therapy session. It's more like they're just sitting with you, sharing what's worked for them.
Totally. And one of the things that stuck with me, like really resonated, is that idea of picking your battles.
Oh, yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in every little thing, you know? But the video makes you step back and ask, is this worth fighting about?
Right.
It's about choosing those conflicts that actually matter for the long haul, not sweating the small stuff.
And they give such a good example with Robert's story about getting advice from his imam. Remember when his wife wanted to paint the kitchen green?
Oh, yeah, yeah. The green kitchen versus the expensive car. It's a perfect example of figuring out what's actually important. The imam basically tells Robert, let her have the green kitchen, even if you don't love it.
It's just not worth a fight, right?
Exactly. It's a small decision in the grand scheme of things. But when it comes to something big, like dropping 50 grand on a car, that's a different story. That's a battle worth having because it affects, their shared future.
That's such a smart way to think about it. And it's not about avoiding conflict altogether. It's about being smart, strategic. Like, what are your non-negotiables in the relationship, and what can you let slide?
It's almost like emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that not every disagreement has to turn into a huge blow-up. Sometimes letting go is actually a sign of strength and maturity.
Yeah, totally. And what's interesting is the imam's advice isn't just about avoiding conflict. He's encouraging Robert to think about his wife's needs and what she wants, even if it's not exactly what he wants.
Oh, for sure.
It's about understanding that sometimes giving in, letting your partner have their way on something small, can be a really powerful way to show love and support.
That's so insightful. It's like letting go of that need to control everything in the relationship and letting your partner be themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that ties into acceptance, which is so important, right? You can't expect your partner to be just like you. And honestly, embracing those differences, even when they lead to disagreements, that's what keeps things interesting.
I love that. Celebrate the differences, don't try to erase them. And speaking of celebrating, the video also talks about appreciating your partner. And not just the big stuff, but those everyday things that we often take for granted.
I love how they talk about appreciation as positive reinforcement. Like you're giving your partner these little reminders that you see them, you value them, you appreciate all the things they do.
Yeah. And that can be super motivating, especially if your partner is really trying to work on themselves, to be better.
That's like giving them fuel to keep going on that journey of like personal growth. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just a simple thank you for doing the dishes or a genuine compliment can make a world of difference.
Totally. And what's really cool is that appreciation doesn't just benefit the person receiving it, it strengthens the whole relationship.
Right.
It creates this positive loop where both people feel seen and valued, which makes them want to do the same for each other.
That reminds me of something I read about the power of gratitude in relationships. Studies show that couples who express gratitude to each other regularly are way more satisfied in their relationships. They feel closer and more committed.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that.
It's like gratitude is this emotional superglue that just makes the bond between partners stronger. Makes total sense.
Yeah.
When you feel appreciated, you feel loved and supported, right? And then you want to give that back. It's like this beautiful cycle of like love and appreciation.
And it's so simple to do, just little things here and there.
Exactly. It's not about spending a ton of money or going over the top. It's about those little acts of kindness and saying thank you that can really make a difference. And that brings us back to what we were talking about earlier. being present and mindful.
Oh, yeah.
If you're always distracted or thinking about other things, you're going to miss those chances to show gratitude and appreciation.
It's about noticing what you're getting, what you're receiving, rather than focusing on what you're not getting.
Right.
But when you do that, it opens up this whole new level of closeness and connection. It's like training yourself to see the good, even when things are hard.
That's a great way to put it.
And speaking of hard times, the video really emphasizes the importance of forgiveness. They talk about how forgiveness isn't about saying what someone did what was okay. It's about letting go of the anger and resentment that you're carrying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Such an important distinction to make.
Forgiveness is about freeing yourself, you know? It's not about the other person. It's about letting go of those heavy feelings that are keeping you from feeling peace and joy.
And they made this really interesting point that forgiveness is more for you than for the other person.
Yeah.
Holding on to anger doesn't change what happened. It just makes you feel worse.
It's so true. It's about taking back your power and choosing to move on with love and compassion for yourself and your partner. And yeah, it's not always easy, but it can be incredibly healing.
The video actually shares this really powerful quote about forgiveness that I thought was so insightful. It says, "Forgiveness is not about forgetting. It is about letting go of another person's throat. Forgiveness is not about condoning. It is about letting go of the hope that the past could be any different. Forgiveness is giving up the right to hurt someone for hurting you. Forgiveness is the answer to the child's dream of a miracle by which what is broken is made whole again. Forgiveness is letting go of the past and being peace with yourself."
Wow, that's deep.
Right. It really shows how much forgiveness can change things. It's not about pretending nothing happened. It's about choosing to let go of the past so you can heal and grow.
And it's not a one-time thing, it's a process, you know? There might be times when those angry feelings come back, but you got to keep choosing forgiveness, keep choosing love over bitterness and blame.
And forgiveness isn't just for romantic relationships. It's important for like every part of your life. Holding grudges against friends, family, or even yourself, it just creates unnecessary pain.
It's like carrying around a heavy weight.
Exactly.
It weighs you down and stops you from feeling light and free.
And forgiveness is not just about letting go of those negative feelings. It's also about trying to understand and have compassion. When you can see things from the other person's perspective, it's so much easier to let go of the anger.
It's about remembering that we're all human. We make mistakes, we have our own baggage, and sometimes forgiving yourself is just as important as forgiving someone else. That's a great point. We can be so hard on ourselves, dwelling on past mistakes. But we deserve the same kindness and compassion that we give to others.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive on conflict resolution, I want you to think about how you can practice forgiveness in your own life. Where are you holding on to anger? Is there someone you need to forgive? Or maybe even yourself?
It's a good question to ask yourself. And remember, forgiveness isn't saying that what happened was okay. It's about freeing yourself and moving on with love and compassion.
You know, one of the things that really struck me about this video was how real and relatable the hosts were. They weren't afraid to share their own struggles with conflict and forgiveness.
No, yeah, definitely.
It felt like we were just chatting with friends, not listening to experts lecture us. And I think that's why their advice felt so powerful and genuine.
I agree. It felt attainable, not like some impossible standard we could never reach.
Exactly. It reminded me that we're all in this together, figuring out relationships and trying to make those connections work.
And sometimes the best advice comes from people who have been there, who have messed up and figured things out along the way.
Absolutely. And I love how they ended the video on such a positive and hopeful note.
Oh, yeah.
Ameenah says, "Anyway, when you know better, baby, you do better. See ya."
It's so simple but powerful, right? It's like we're all works in progress, always learning and growing, and our relationships reflect that. Yeah, it's about embracing the ups and downs and remembering that being perfect isn't the goal.
Right.
The goal is to keep learning, keep growing, and keep trying to be the best partner you can be.
And that all starts with understanding yourself. Recognizing your own patterns and habits, especially the ones that lead to conflict, that's the first step to building healthier relationships.
It's definitely an ongoing process. There will be times when we fall back into old habits, make mistakes, but the important thing is to keep practicing, keep learning, and choose love and compassion over fear and resentment.
It's about remembering that you have the power to choose how you react to conflict. Even when you disagree, you can choose to be kind, understanding, and empathetic. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is simply forgive. You know, it's kind of wild how much we got out of a YouTube video, right?
I know, right?
I feel like we could talk about this stuff for hours.
Yeah,
But even just scratching the surface, it's like shifted my perspective a little.
me too. It really shows you the power of, like, hearing real people's stories and experiences. Ameenah, Robert, and D9, they weren't trying to be some big experts, you know? They were just sharing their own journeys and the things they've learned along the way.
And that's what makes it so real, like it's not about trying to be perfect. It's about embracing the messiness of relationships.
Exactly. And remembering that we're all, like, constantly evolving, always learning, and our relationships, they change right along with us.
So as we wrap things up, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Mm.
It's inspired by how the video ends. If forgiveness is really about, like, freeing ourselves, how can we apply that not just to our romantic relationships, but to everything?
That's a really good question. Imagine if we could offer that same grace and compassion to our friends, family, even ourselves.
Right. Think about how much lighter we'd feel if we let go of all that anger and resentment from the past.
Yeah.
Because holding on to it, it doesn't change what happened. It just eats away at us.
It really does.
Forgiveness, on the other hand, it's like this act of, like, setting yourself free.
Totally. It takes courage, but it's so worth it.
Remember what Ameenah said. When you know better, baby, you do better.
Mm.
We're all capable of learning and growing,
Mm.
and our relationships can grow with us. So think about what resonated with you from this deep dive. What can you do to handle conflict better? And where could you offer a little more forgiveness? Maybe to someone else, maybe even to yourself.
And you don't have to do it all at once. Small steps, just keep at it. Be patient with yourself, be kind.